Afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Dan Cohen with MintPress News. Today, we are going to be discussing, rather, we as in I'm going solo today. I'm going to be discussing the so-called migrant crisis that has come, well, across the U.S.-Mexico border and is now in Washington, D.C., here where I am. It's in Martha's Vineyard, and basically elite liberal enclaves in this part of the country. And kind of, I'm going to examine the responses from kind of Team Blue and Team Red, and we're just basically going to talk about show the hypocrisy coming from both sides, and essentially how they're using these migrants to score political points in both in their own kind of cynical ways, and while at the same time they're united in refusing to address the root of the problem, why migrants are coming to the United States and have been for so many years, as if this is talked about in the media and in the government as if this is some kind of new crisis. It's basically a permanent crisis. um, so I'm gonna do my best to respond to comments. Please share this stream across social media platforms. We are heavily censored by YouTube's algorithm. Um, that's well known, the censorship of alternative media outlets. So we have to beat that censorship, and so to do that, share and spread this far and wide. I'll also do everything I can to respond to super chats. Any of those are much appreciated, and they go directly towards my haircut fund, which I will be hopefully doing soon. First off, I want to just thank our host Restream, which is which allows us to do this stream, for allowing us, as you can see, to show solidarity with Ukraine. That's apparently that's an option. I can have the MintPress News logo in the corner, or I can have Restream's yellow and blue to show solidarity with NATO against evil Russia. Which of course, they don't have a Russia icon if you're pro-Russia, or they don't have one for children in Yemen being slaughtered by U.S.-made missiles and bombs. There's not one for Palestinians in the Gaza ghetto. So, you know, um, just Ukraine. It's the only way to show solidarity for anything, is you have to show solidarity for Ukraine, and that's it. So again, really impressive of Restream to do this. Um, but more to the point of today's stream. So, as probably anyone who's on social media is paying attention to news today is seeing, there is a so-called migrant crisis that is now taken over the nation's capital. So today, or yesterday and the day before, basically, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, both of whom are Republicans, have have sent busloads of migrants into first of all, it was yesterday was Martha's Vineyard. So here we have a CNN article showing exactly what happened. Two planes carrying migrants were sent by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a presidential hopeful, obviously, to Martha's Vineyard on Wednesday night. So that was the night before last. His office said, infuriating Democratic politicians and prompting a frenzied response that included humanitarian aid by locals and assistance by Massachusetts officials. So basically, these migrants who'd made it to San Antonio were loaded onto planes, and apparently promised a ride, and they ended up in they were promised jobs, even reportedly, and they ended up in this tiny little vacation spot of Martha's Vineyard, which is the presidential vacation spot, an island off of the coast of Massachusetts. So basically, DeSantis did that in order to just rile up his crowd, to throw some red meat to his crowd. his base of support. And then the day before, Greg Abbott did a similar thing. Um, the governor of Texas did a similar thing where he sent buses that uh, dumped migrants at Kamala Harris's house. Here you can see some of it. So this is right outside the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., very close to where a lot of embassies are. And the vice president's official residence is located on the grounds. This is a really short video. You can just see people getting off the bus. I have another one. Um, so this is the entrance to the Naval Observatory where Kamala Harris lives. And you can just see, I think there were about 100 people. I think I read 101 people were dumped off here with obviously nowhere to go. So a really kind of cynical stunt. Um, and this is kind of the Republican game of on one of essentially showing the hypocrisy of Democratic Party figures, which on one hand is effective, and oops, I understand to a degree. However, it's extremely um, inhumanitarian. The fact is, these are people who are fleeing all kinds of horrors, and they're just being used as political pawns by both sides. And so, well, I can understand if you're living in a border town and your town is overwhelmed by huge amounts of people coming through, that you want to send a message. The fact is, these are people with who are in a humanitarian crisis and have needs, and it's an extremely cynical ploy by these governors to do so. I think there are other ways to do this, to make the point, and that's what I want to explore today. So, one of the so basically, what we've seen is a reaction from Democratic Party figures and their aligned media that it's totally inhumane and sick to carry out these kinds of stunts, which of course is true. However, there's no honesty about why these migrants are coming to the U.S., why they're crossing the border, what is bringing them here. So one of the things here's from the Martha's Vineyards. What in their official account, I guess they've actually, I don't know how well you can see this. It's kind of it's small text, but Governor Charlie Baker of Massachusetts plans to activate up to 125 members of the Massachusetts National Guard um, to, I guess, I don't know, essentially get rid of these migrants. So I mean, the what encapsulates it best to me is this meme of the liberal hypocrisy, which is totally true. I mean, I see these all over Washington D.C. Is these signs about Black Lives Matter and no human is illegal, which is of course the one referencing migrants, and then it's the Simpsons meme with Homer backing into the bush, the hedges, and coming out with the no trespassing meme. Like basically, these liberals don't actually want migrants in their cities. They just want to have these phony shows of solidarity, which is true. That's completely true. That liberals are crying crocodile tears. Here's a pretty remarkable tweet that is now deleted from NBC News that calls the migrants and asylum seekers trash, and says DeSantis is doing is like me taking my trash out and just driving to different areas where I live and throwing my trash there. So somehow that got by the editors at NBC News and was approved and tweeted out. And after I think a couple hours of backlash online on social media, they realized that maybe that's not the best messaging. So, profound cynicism, I think, from both sides, from Republicans who are just using them as pawns, as props, to basically throw red meat to their base of support. And but at the same time, it is effective in getting elite liberals in the Democratic Party to face a tiny bit of reality that border towns face on a daily basis. So that's why it's effective, because it actually resonates with people. Um, I mean, this has actually been going on here in DC for a couple of months. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who sent the migrants to Kamala Harris's residence, he's been sending buses of migrants pretty much every day. And when that first started happening, Mayor Bowser, the mayor of New York City, or I'm sorry, the mayor of Washington D.C., who is a total neoliberal, she asked Biden to deploy the National Guard, and he refused. So all of a sudden, it was, from Muriel Bowser, who put Black Lives Matter Square right in front of the White House as kind of an fu to Trump, and and is supported by so many liberals here in this city who put these signs out on their front yard, saying no human is illegal. All of a sudden, there are migrants here, and it's a major crisis. So um, the hypocrisy is just over the top. But none of it, I mean, I can sit here and point out this hypocrisy all day, but it doesn't really get to the root of the problem. Why, in the end, are um, migrants coming to this country en masse? Why is this happening all the time? And what is at the root of the problem? That is basically the question that neither side will bother to answer or bother to even examine, and that's what I want to do today. Is look at the policies that are driving this kind of permanent crisis, of migration, of asylum seekers, of people fleeing to the United States. Now, I want to start with Venezuela because the majority of the migrants, reportedly, who were dropped off in front of Kamala Harris's residence and at Martha's Vineyard, are Venezuelans, if not all. So let's take a look at migration rates from Venezuela. Um, it's a recent phenomenon. Mass migration from Venezuela is a recent phenomenon. So if we look at this article, the very first thing it says: the Venezuelan immigrant population in the United States has more than tripled in size since the turn of the century, so since 2000, and much of this growth has occurred in just a few years, as Venezuela's economic and political destabilization has led to a mass exodus across the Americas and beyond. So and then it adds, the population of Venezuelan immigrants in the United States has risen 54% since 2015, when it stood at 256,000. By 2018, this population had grown to 394,000. So what those numbers show is something happened beginning, I don't know, around 2015, that compelled a lot of Venezuelans to leave their country, to flee through extremely dangerous territory, to make harrowing journeys through the northern end of South America, across the Darien Gap into Central America, through up through Mexico and into North America, and of course to the U.S.-Mexico border, which, as everyone knows, is extremely dangerous. So what was happening from 2015 to 2018, when, according to this, the population had grown, so had begun to rise by eventually 54%. Well, that was the U.S. economic war on Venezuela had gone into full effect. So the first sanctions against Venezuela started in 2015, I believe. Yes, March 2015. And that is when, here we have it. What happened in 2015 is President Obama issued a new executive order declaring a national emergency with respect to the unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States posed by the situation in Venezuela. So this was the start of the most recent economic political war against Venezuela. And right around the same time, mass migration began out of Venezuela. Okay, since then, what has happened in Venezuela since 2015? Well, the U.S. has tried to overthrow the elected president Nicolas Maduro by um, declaring that Juan Guaido, a basically unknown opposition figure from a marginal party, was in fact the president. And that was something that had total bipartisan support. So here, Republicans and Democrats completely agree. Here's when Trump invited Juan Guaido to the State of the Union address in 2020. So you see them all. You see every single Republican, every single Democrat. I think that's AOC. That's the squad back here in in the white who are all cheering for Juan Guaido. Oh yeah. So they're all cheering for this. All of remember AOC standing at the border and in her pantsuit, crying crocodile tears for the migrants. Well, she was cheering on the destruction of their country right here when she was applauding for none other than Juan Guaido, the fake president of Venezuela, just like every other Democrat and every other Republican. There's Pelosi, there's Pence. This is what we call the uniparty in action, and this is what largely destroyed Venezuela's economy, and that's why today there are Venezuelan migrants being bused to Washington D.C., to Kamala Harris's residence, to to Martha's Vineyard. So had that not happened, then none of this would be happening. We wouldn't have this crisis, okay? And that was kind of the beginning of well, by 2020 it was full in. I mean, this was early in 2019 is when they tried to appoint Juan Guaido as president. And if you read the investigation I co-authored at the time, you'll know that Juan Guaido was trained here in Washington D.C. and is basically was trained by a CIA cutout. Um, so, he's just a regime change operative that is a tool of Washington completely. So, whether Trump knew that or not, I kind of doubt Trump knew that. Who knew? Who knows? Maybe he did. But I think Trump was looking for an easy win against a socialist government and thought that, and was convinced by his advisors that it would happen quickly if he just appointed Guaido. Um, so what happened after that is you have American mercenaries attempted to assassinate President Maduro. So um, that was a major moment. There was a failed assassination attempt. A squad of American mercenaries may or may not have been official business who attempted to infiltrate Venezuela and capture, kidnap, and I think assassinate Maduro. They were foiled by some Venezuelan fishermen, which kind of says a lot. Um, the Then we have, of course, there was an attempt by the opposition, parts of the opposition, to assassinate Maduro with a drone during a rally. I remember exactly the moment that happened. So then there was all the rounds of sanctions that just destroyed the economy so bad. Let's go back to this, that it reduced Venezuela's GDP by 99%. US economic warfare, aka sanctions, foreign currency revenues plunged by 99% because of US sanctions. And it all goes back to Obama declaring Venezuela to be some kind of threat to the national security of the United States, which was totally bogus. So, I mean, just imagine what would happen to this country, to the United States, if we lost 99% of our GDP. The inflation that we're dealing with right now would be a cakewalk. That's everything. 99%. That's basically 100. That's 100%. That's 1% away from 100. That's everything. So, just absolute destruction of the economy, thanks to the United States. So again, that is why the um, we have this situation. That's why Venezuelans are fleeing. Now, the Republicans and Democrats have just basically ignored all of this, of course, because they both support it. Um, and I mean, I haven't. Is there a single Republican or Democrat who's spoken out against U.S. sanctions on Venezuela? I do not believe so, and that includes, the kind of populist right figures who have spoken out against um, the weapon shipments to Ukraine. But because this a lot of this happened when Trump was in power, and they're also ideologically opposed to socialism and see it as the kind of root of all evil, they didn't say anything, and they all basically supported it. I hope someone will correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm happy to correct it if I'm wrong. But I don't think anyone spoke out against these sanctions. Did anyone on the squad do it? I don't think so. So here's what Karina Jean Pierre had to say um, yesterday about the uh, the the crisis. This is remarkable. Karina Jean Pierre, by the way, White House press secretary, for anyone who doesn't know. Here we go. So fleeing communism is what Karine Jean-Pierre says. She blames communism. That's the same thing the right wing blames. That's the same thing Republicans. So we have two sides, two political parties supposedly in opposition to each other who are in total agreement that we should destroy this country that actually poses no threat. And then they point fingers at each other and carry out political stunts, as Karine Jean Pierre called it, to blame each other for the consequences, which are actual, human beings. And as Karina Jean Pierre said, children and families fleeing for their lives and risking their lives to be able to survive. That is how. Oh, sorry, we couldn't get. I see. No sound. That's too bad. Okay. Okay, I'll just say quickly what Karina Jean-Pierre said. They asked her about this, stunts, about what happened with, people being dropped off, and she says, "This is a stunt, and these are people fleeing communism." That's what Karina Jean-Pierre said. Sorry that didn't work. Um, so Karina Jean-Pierre, again, blames communism, not the economic destruction of Venezuela carried out by the United States, by the uniparty, the imperial uniparty. She says, so it's the same thing. Again, it's the same thing the right wing blames in the United States because ideologically, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they always put ideology ahead of reality, and their ideology is anti communism. So we have two sides supposedly in opposition that are basically completely agree that we have to destroy this country, that it doesn't pose any threat. And then when there are consequences, they point fingers at each other and carry out political stunts in order to blame each other, and demonize. We either demonize or shed crocodile tears, as Karina Jean Pierre did in that clip where she says, "These are human beings, these are children," which they are, and she is in support of destroying their lives. Um, I mean, one of the other talking points you hear is that these. I mean, especially from we just heard, or I heard. Sorry, it didn't work out to show the clip. Is that this is communism, but you also hear that it's Nicolas Maduro's mismanagement. Nicolas Maduro mismanaged the economy, which is totally bogus, and is more than that is hypocrisy. Look at Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia. Okay, Colombia has a far worse migration situation, and it is never, ever, ever called mismanagement. Here, check this out. Let's go back to this article. Let's see, where is it? Colombia. Okay. Oh, here it is. Until recently, the number of Venezuelans in the United States was relatively small compared to immigrants from other South American countries. For instance, the 107,000 Venezuelans who resided in the United States in 2000 were roughly equal to one-fifth the number of immigrants from Colombia. In 2018, by comparison, there were about half as many Venezuelans as Colombians. So even through this entire crisis caused by U.S. sanctions, there's still not as many Venezuelans as there are Colombians. So it's sheer hypocrisy. They don't apply that label to Colombia because Colombia is a client state of the US. It's a puppet of the United States. And the United States is pillaging resources from Colombia. It's The United States is supporting the military that is known to carry out massacres of social leaders, that has killed more than 1,000, something like 1,500 social leaders since the peace accord was signed in 2016. But that's just considered regular business. So if it's a government that charts an independent path of U.S. hegemony, then the U.S. tries to overthrow it and destroy it and portray it as some kind of terrible, mismanaged country. But if U.S. corporations are pillaging your country and people are fleeing even in much higher amounts, then that's just regular. That's just doing business. So no one will talk about, outside of independent media, alternative media, no one will talk about the real reason that Venezuelans are leaving. But of course, Venezuela is not the only country where people are fleeing from. We can also look at Haiti is another recent one that was in the news a couple of months ago. So if you remember this photo, this is of a border patrol agent, um, basically rounding up a Haitian migrant. A really cruel photo, and it kind of it became this crisis in the media where Biden promised swift, harsh action against this monster border patrol agent, because it's white supremacy and this and that, which it is awful. I mean, this is horrible treatment of Haitian migrants. But why, again, why are Haitians fleeing Haiti? And if you look at Haiti, and I've actually spent some time in Haiti, as many of you probably know, I have a documentary series coming out about Haiti. Well, has a lot to do with being the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and extreme violence. So that comes with that, and that's a result of U.S. empire, of the legacy of U.S. empire and its current status. Haiti's current status as a neo-colonial outpost of U.S. empire. So not only is there extreme poverty, there's also one of the biggest U.S. Embassies in the world is in Haiti. So, eh, you know, usually where there's people fleeing, there's U.S. empire. That's the case in Colombia. That's the case in Venezuela. That's the case in Haiti. Of course, we can look at Central America, where people have long been fleeing. Any anyone Everyone should know that, the history of U.S. intervention in Central America, and basically setting those up and their maintenance as neo-colonies. And what's happened is the United States has poured huge amounts of money, billions of dollars, into private sector development. What's really remarkable to me about this is, so this is June of this year. The Kamala Harris announced 1.9 billion for private sector in Central America, and so now that adds up to 3.2 billion total. And this is part of their strategy to address the root cause of migration in Central America, which is just incredible, because the whole thing here is this is incredible doublespeak. This is all about maintaining the root cause of migration in Central America, big supporting big business uproots people. It's basically what happens is they pour money into these huge corporations and developments, which assassinate, expel, develop land for the benefit of international corporations, not for local people. And then they have puppet governments and paramilitaries and militaries that do their dirty work. That's the case of the assassination of Berta Cáceres in Honduras some years ago, and activists are slaughtered, and so whether in Colombia, whether in Central America. So this is just incredible doublespeak. Um, so I mean, one of the things that I want to kind of address some of the answers that the right and the left give, the so-called right, the so-called left. I don't mean the anti-imperialist left, which I kind of come from, and the you know that's basically the only people that I see have kind of get things right. But the thing on the right wing and the populist right that's claimed is that we have open borders, that Biden has an open border policy, and that people can just kind of come into the country at any time. And you watch videos. Let me see if I can play this video. So check this out. This is from a journalist named Jorge Ventura, who I've met, and he actually had me on his show, and is a really nice guy. He's a reporter for the Daily Caller. I met him at the anti-mandate rally here in Washington D.C., and he invited me on his show, which I really appreciated, to talk about vaccine mandates and why they're wrong. Um, and so he's someone who, I actually have a lot of respect for. He's, as you'll see here, and if you pay attention to his reporting, he's someone who's spending a lot of time on the ground. So he's not someone who's, just talking from far away. He's a real reporter. He's on the ground. Um and so if you watch this video that he posted, then you see people just kind of coming in, and maybe you can't hear it, but he's asking people what country they're coming from: Cuba, Peru, this Colombia, Venezuela. So basically, you just see people, yes, are kind of pouring across the border here. I'm not sure exactly where this is, but it's a huge line of people. But obviously, it's right on the border. I believe this is in Arizona. Okay, in Yuma, which I'm from Arizona, so I know this area. Um, but so it kind of, if you just look at that, it makes it look like there's open borders and that's it. Anyone can just come across. But of course, um, that's not exactly the case. There's an enormous border enforcement apparatus, and then once you get across, there's a good chance you're very likely to be deported in any number of ways. But the solution from the populist right is to militarize the border even more, to send the military, to treat it as a war zone, and to complete construction of a border wall, which of course started with George Bush, and was continued under Trump, and then was paused under Obama. It wasn't deconstructed. So you would think, if you were some kind of liberal politician and you wanted to be against it, then you would deconstruct rather than just pause the development of this awful border wall. But instead, it was paused, and then Trump continued it, and now Biden said he has paused it, but there is I've seen videos of ongoing construction. So, um, the idea of a construction of a complete border wall along the basically almost 2,000-mile U.S. Mexico border, to me, is completely insane, especially when you consider that there it doesn't address the root of the problem. Will it stop people from crossing? No, you can't actually stop people from crossing a 2,000-mile border unless as they want to do, send the military to just be on the border and arrest or shoot anyone who comes near. That's completely insane. That should be considered. That should be thought of as wrong to anyone who has any kind of conscience or logic. That this seems completely wacky. Not to mention the environmental destruction that happens as a result of construction of this wall, the seizure of private property, ranches that have long existed along the border, the bifurcation of binational towns, El Paso Juarez, Ambos Nogales, for example. You have many communities that have an international border between them. And cutting them off, sometimes you have one side of the family living on one side and one part of the family living on the other. And what's happened in recent years is people are just totally cut off. So they can't see their families, or it's extremely difficult. And so the reality for people living in border communities is especially binational border communities, is completely different than, we imagine here in Washington, or people who don't know the border. And nonetheless, people find ways to go over the wall, around it, under it. It's just never gonna stop them. Um, so the solution of more the uniparty of the Democratic Party and much of the Republican Party is to build what they call a smart wall. So that's like basically a combination drones, um, of drones, of sensors, of surveillance towers, of all kinds of electronic technologies to basically surveil the border, so they can just watch migrants go into remote areas and go on these harrowing, death treks through the desert. And it's an incredible industry where people make huge amounts of money, but it's um, not a solution either. But to Democrats, it's sold as well. Here, I'll take a look at this op-ed. This is from Jim Clyburn, who I think is the number 3 Democrat in the House. This is from 2019. He says, "Border security that is smart, just, and merciful." So, you know, having Border Patrol observe and surveil from far away as people die in the desert is just and merciful. It's just, this is how Democrats always do, is they make themselves appear more enlightened and nice, and we care about black lives and migrant lives, and no human being is illegal, and all these things, when it's basically just a lipstick on a pig. It's just a glossed up version of the same imperial policies. And that's essentially all this is. And it's an enormous industry. If you go spend any time around the U.S. Mexico border, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in southern Arizona. I'm from Arizona, and it's well known, it's well reported about is towers, surveillance towers designed and constructed by Elbit Systems, the Israeli military contractor that um, develops this technology on occupied Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and then exports it around the world. And so southern Arizona has become one of the hotspots for that kind of technology. My friend Todd Miller has done a lot of reporting on that. And so, the other thing that kind of the right, I think, does not address is the fact that the US border is not just the US Mexico border or the US Canada border. The US operates um, a system of borders all over the world. My friend Todd Miller, a journalist in Tucson, Arizona, he has an excellent book called Empire of Borders that goes in depth into this phenomenon. So I'm going to take a couple things from his book, which I don't have access to, so I had to just kind of steal from it. Sorry, Todd. But here, take a look at this at this line. So um this is in 2004, Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Robert Bonner called for extending our zone of security where we can do so beyond our physical borders, so that American borders are the last line of defense, not the first line of defense. So the US so what he's calling for is that by the time migrants reach the US Mexico border, they've gone through a gauntlet of other basically border enforcement apparatuses. And the United States trains all kinds of um, border enforcement regimes in around the world. And that's something that Todd has again reported extensively on. and is just kind of ignored by the populist right, and that's something that I would want to challenge them on. I'd be happy to debate somebody on. Um, so then we look at the here's another great quote. This is from General John Kelly's confirmation hearing back in 2017 when he said, "Where is it? Borders." Hang on, let me find this. Okay. He says border security cannot be attempted as an endless series of goal line stands on the 1 foot line at the official ports of entry or along the thousands of miles between his country and Mexico. Okay. And that he goes on to say, oh, and he also says the defense of the southwest border starts 1,500 miles south. That is partnering with great countries as far south as Peru. So again, the the United States operates its border around the world. Not to mention, so we have this enormous complex of border enforcement regimes that the United States and ICE operate, and Customs and Border Protection operate around the world throughout Latin America. And then we also have, of course, the fact that the border doesn't apply to the United States that carries out to the U.S. empire that carries out. Let me say that again. The U.S. The border does not apply to U.S. empire when it carries out coups and assassinations and invasions in countries around the world. It doesn't apply when sanctions destroy economies. So for our politicians to suddenly say, we have sovereignty and borders matter when people are fleeing the destruction that our sanctions and coups and invasions have caused is totally hollow and hypocritical. And we have to be able to see through that. And I think that's a key thing for regardless of your political party. I don't care if you are red or blue or who you voted for in 2012 or 2000 or 2020. It doesn't matter. We have to understand that reality. Um, and again, this is the uniparty. This is Trump's DHS secretary, Obama's, all of them are the same in that way. So we have a giant border industrial complex that operates all over the world, um, that basically regulates the fleeing of people who have been destroyed, whose countries have been destroyed and upended by U.S. empire. And of course, this complex needs the threat of migration in order to justify its ever increasing budget. So, not to mention, of course, the deportation industrial complex, the imprisonment the carceral industrial complex, call it what you will, that imprisons so many migrants. I think of Eloy, Arizona, which the majority of its economy is basically people working in private prisons that house migrants in the town of Florence. And that's, keeps entire local economies afloat. In the post 9/11 era, we've seen Customs and Border Protection become the largest enforcement agency in the country, the largest law enforcement agency in the country. And that is, here's let me see, I pulled up a graphic that shows that. So here's in 1992, there were 4,139 Border Patrol agents. By 20, what? You can see it starts steadily increasing. Um, and then by 2012, so in the peak of the Obama years, you had 2,444, decreased a tiny bit. Okay, and now today, here's this one. We have, so this is for this year, um, 25,914. So we went from 4,000, about 4,000 in 1992 to today in 2022, 25,000. So an enormous increase that has made Customs and Border Protection the largest law enforcement agency in the country. Not to mention, I mean, look at all of this stuff. We have uh, so the almost 26,000 CBP officers, 2,693 Customs and Border Protection agriculture specialists, 19,536 Border Patrol agents, okay, 598 air interdiction agents, these are pilots, 358 maritime interdiction agents, 360 aviation enforcement. I don't know how that's different from air interdiction. 1,114 trade personnel. And then what else? We have conducted operations in 48 countries with more than 723 CBP employees working internationally. Uh, so, this is all over the world. This is in 48 different countries that Customs and Border Protection is operating. And this is something that happened, thanks to 9/11. That was the big gift, not only for the neocons who wanted to go to war in Iraq, but for the border industrial complex, and that gave the US this pretext to establish its, this kind of control all over the world. Um, so I mean, it's remarkable. There's just no criticism. I don't see any criticism of this anymore. Really, hardly on the left at all. It's kind of, this was during the Obama era. It was talked about more, and not on the right at all. And so I think, this is a real weakness of the populist right, who, I think does get some things right. I mean, a lot of the populist right is opposed to US support for Ukraine in this proxy war against Russia, but they don't get this stuff. I mean, so like this is what the populist right, this kind of thing is what the populist right calls globalism. I mean, I don't really have any problem with the term globalism. It's just how people say imperialism. Some liberals want to say that it's an anti-Semitic term, and it's not. There's nothing anti-Semitic about the term globalism in itself. Maybe some anti-Semite uses it, but because there's the age-old conspiracy theory of a anti-Semitic, cabal of Jews controlling the world, but it's imperialism. And so, there's no that's what they're talking about. And so that's what I think that needs to be examined by the populist right. So fundamentally, none of this stuff is stopping the migration problem is the thing. So like the left has these answers of, the left, I don't mean like the left I'm part of, the real anti-imperialist left, the dissident left. I mean the kind of captured Democratic Party left, for lack of a better term. Um, their answer of a smart wall is to just basically, watch people coming into the country because it benefits our corporate overlords to have this unending labor supply. And then we have the right that just wants to build a wall and be kind of brutal and do away with the niceties while maintaining the system of imperialism. And neither of these are real answers. So um, basically, in the end, we have this status quo of destabilization of countries. So their labor forces leave, come to the United States where they can be exploited by corporations who don't give them any protections and give them, basically just exploit them as cheap labor. And then it also allows, at the same time, you have U.S. corporations going into these countries and robbing them of their resources. So it's a win-win for the corporate state, really. So it's the answer, of course, is not to shed crocodile tears for the victims of U.S. empire, nor is it to demonize them. It's to end U.S. empire, to end imperialism. So I want to Todd's last name, I see that comment. Todd's last name is Miller, Todd Miller. He has a really good book also called Border Patrol Nation. So hopefully I'll have Todd on it soon. And he wasn't available today, unfortunately, but Yes, Todd Miller is the guy you're looking for. Empire of Borders, Border Patrol Nation, another really good book. So yeah, so I'm gonna leave it there. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will be back to streaming, doing regular streams soon, and we'll have documentaries coming out. I'll be back in the game soon enough. So thanks a lot everyone for tuning in, and please again share this stream widely, and help us beat the algorithm. And thanks for joining.